Have you ever had the feeling that no one cares anymore? Like the whole world has moved on, and you've been left behind? That was exactly how he felt that day. A young man alone on a park bench, his eyes brimming with tears, his head bowed, and his chest heavy with a pain he could no longer explain. The wind rustled the dry leaves around him, but he heard nothing, not the distant laughter, not the hurried footsteps of people passing by. It was as if the whole world had gone silent, except for the silent scream that echoed within him. How many times do we pass someone on the street and never even imagine the silent battle they're facing? It could be a neighbor, a co-worker, or even a stranger sitting in the square staring blankly. That's how it all began, with a deep silence and a sadness he'd been carrying for a long time. And in that moment, he believed there was no way out, no light at the end of the tunnel, no outstretched hand. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever had that feeling that no one will show up, that no one sees your pain? But what he didn't know was that, at that very moment, something improbable was about to happen, an encounter that would change everything, one of those stories that almost seem made up, but are so real, so human, that they touch the heart of whoever hears it. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps even remind you of someone who appeared in your life at just the right moment, as if sent by destiny. The woman arrived slowly, almost as if she were just passing by. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, her steps slow but steady. She wasn't carrying anything in her hands, just a serene gaze, the kind that seems to see beyond the surface. While everyone around her hurried past, dodging, looking at their phones or into space, she was the only one who actually saw him. Can you imagine what was said? What could someone, a complete stranger, say to turn a young man's life into a shambles? This is one of those true stories of unexpected encounters that change everything, that prove that sometimes salvation comes from where we least expect it. That grand gestures aren't always the only things that save us. Sometimes it's just a word, a listening ear, a hug. In a world so fast-paced, so full of distractions, this story is a powerful reminder that presence is worth more than promises, that compassion still exists, even in the most unlikely places. And there's more. This story isn't about luck, it's about connection, about how a simple gesture can be the turning point in someone's life. Because behind that park bench, behind that silent cry, there was a story that needed to be heard, and a life that still had so much left to live. As she sat beside him, saying nothing at first, time seemed to slow down. It was as if, in that moment, there were only the two of them, a young man on the brink, and an elderly woman who, for some reason he never understood, chose to stop. And this is where it all begins. She didn't ask his name, or what had happened. She simply sat beside him, her silence saying more than any prepared words, and it was in this shared silence that his heart slowly began to beat differently, as if the lady's presence was saying, "I see you, you matter." For a few minutes, they stood there, side by side, unhurried, until she looked at him with a sweetness that was hard to describe, and said something so simple, yet so profound, that he never forgot it. Sometimes, all we need is someone who won't look away. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever been surprised by someone who showed up when you needed them most, even without knowing it? Or maybe you've already been that person in someone's life. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. It could be a memory, a feeling, an opinion. Your story can also inspire others going through difficult times. And here, each comment creates a conversation, a welcoming space where no one needs to feel alone. If this kind of content moves you, makes you reflect, or even gives you a little more hope, like the video now, this really helps show YouTube that it's worth bringing stories like this to more people, people who might need to hear exactly what they're saying today. And if you feel like continuing to follow these real stories with unexpected encounters and transformative life lessons, subscribe to the channel. Your participation is what makes this space grow and reach more people with this kind of message. Together, we build a community that believes in the power of care, listening, and empathy. As she told pieces of her own story, stories of loss, of overcoming, and of silences that had also been heavy, his shoulders relaxed. His eyes were still red, but now there was something different in them. A spark, small, almost imperceptible, but alive. His name was Nathan, 23 years old. The age when many are starting out in life, dreaming big, making plans, but he already felt old inside, tired, empty. From a young age he learned that the world isn't always kind. He grew up in a fractured home, amid heavy silences and arguments that seemed never-ending. His father left the scene early, and his mother, though physically present, was too emotionally distant to see that her son was slowly fading away. Adolescence was a jumble of attempts to fit in, but the pain he carried couldn't be conveyed in superficial conversations, so he kept quiet. He swallowed his tears, masked his discouragement with automatic smiles. Have you ever heard someone say, "He always looks good"? Well, yes. Sometimes that phrase hides a world of silent struggles. After finishing school, Nathan even tried to get back on his feet. He got a temporary job at a garage, then did some odd jobs as a delivery driver, but nothing permanent. Time passed, his friends moved on, and he remained, trapped between frustrations and internal pressures that told him every day that he was late, that he had failed, that he wasn't enough. His mind became an invisible prison where self-sabotage and comparison were merciless jailers. In recent months, things got really tough. The rent was late, the refrigerator was almost empty, and the constant feeling that no one cared. He'd already sent out dozens of resumes, knocked on doors that didn't open, received messages that began with, "Unfortunately," and the hardest part, no one knew, because he wouldn't say. And when you don't talk, the suffering echoes inside. That's why he was on that park bench that day. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was a soul-draining exhaustion. A sadness so thick it felt weighty. You know when your body is there but your mind is elsewhere, wondering what it would be like if everything just stopped. That was it. And at that point in his journey, Nathan didn't want advice or magic solutions. He just wanted to be seen. He wanted to feel that somehow there was still a chance to breathe above water. This is where we need to pay closer attention to this kind of story, because behind every automatic, everything's fine may lie an abyss. There's a hidden truth in the way we live. The rush, the judgments, the labels, all of this distances us from listening. And when listening disappears, the other becomes just a figure in the background, voiceless, colorless, faceless. Nathan was this other, invisible to the crowd but full of life screaming inside. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. There's a turning point that few people see when we talk about stories like Nathan's. The difference between giving up and moving on often lies in a single moment, a single one. It could be a word, a look, a fond memory, or, as in this case, an unlikely encounter. The impact of this kind of gesture is like throwing a stone into a calm lake. Ripples spread far beyond the point of contact. And that's what we need to start realizing, that our actions, even the smallest ones, have a reach that goes beyond what we can imagine. Transforming someone's life doesn't always begin with big decisions. Sometimes it begins in the welcoming silence of someone simply sitting nearby. This doesn't mean problems magically disappear. It means that, in that moment, the person is no longer alone, and that alone changes everything. Nathan's journey isn't just about one encounter, but it was that moment, that unexpected pause, that opened a ray of light in the darkness he had already accepted as eternal. This story invites us to rethink our own mindsets. How many times have we walked past someone and chosen not to notice? How many times have we felt something similar, but pretended to be okay so as not to bother them? There's an emotional underbelly in everyone's life that's rarely exposed. And if we're not sensitive enough to see it, we continue to reproduce the cycle of indifference. The curious thing is that, until that day, Nathan had never spoken to a stranger on the street. He had never looked into a stranger's eyes and felt genuine welcome. And yet there he was, being reached by someone who wasn't part of his routine, his history, his reality, but who, in that moment, became the missing anchor. And that's precisely where the beauty of these unexpected revelations lies. They don't follow logic, they simply happen, and when they do, they transform. Comment: that makes sense to me, because sometimes all we need is to discover that someone on the other side understands what we feel. That day, Nathan didn't leave the house with a specific destination in mind. He only knew he couldn't stand being there any longer, locked between his four walls, his thoughts pounding relentlessly. He grabbed his coat, walked aimlessly, and stopped in that square almost by instinct or perhaps by exhaustion. He sat on the farthest bench, where few people passed by, and let his weight fall as if that were the only movement left. His lost gaze, his slumped shoulders, his red eyes. He wasn't crying for anything specific. It was an accumulated pain, made up of small disappointments, failures, unspoken words, and unfulfilled promises, including those he made to himself. There are days when we don't even have the strength to try to hide it, and Nathan couldn't hide it anymore. He was there, raw, his soul exposed. The ground seemed to have disappeared from under his feet, and he felt like he was slowly sinking into a place where no one could hear his screams. It's a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being surrounded by people. It has to do with not feeling like he belonged anywhere. He looked around and saw only distances. Lives that seemed so organized, so resolved, while he stood still, unsure of what the next step would be, or if there would be one. And it was at that specific moment, when he thought nothing made sense anymore, that something inside him snapped. It wasn't a loud rupture, it was subtle, an internal break like a final string snapping. Perhaps you know this feeling, that mixture of profound sadness and silent surrender. It's not a scream, it's not drama, it's just the end of an attempt. He wasn't exactly thinking about dying, but he also couldn't imagine what it would be like to continue living like that. It's a fine line, almost imperceptible, but it separates those who still believe from those who no longer see meaning. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened there isn't uncommon. We don't talk about it much, but there are thousands of Nathans out there. People who go on autopilot, who carry invisible pain, who go about their tasks, smiling in photos, replying okay, but inside, they're in a state of collapse. There's a hidden truth about emotional suffering. It doesn't let you know it's here. It creeps in slowly, silently, and before you know it, it's already living with you. And the cruelest thing is that, often, the person themselves begins to believe the pain is their fault, that they shouldn't be feeling this way, that they're being weak, dramatic, ungrateful. Nathan felt exactly like that, guilty for not being able to escape that dark place, guilty for being sad, even though he knew other people had bigger problems. But this is one of the biggest mistakes we make, comparing pain. Pain doesn't need to be validated by a ranking. It just needs to be felt, embraced, understood. And on that park bench, all he needed was someone to tell him that. Someone to tell him it was okay not to be okay. The breaking point, in fact, wasn't that moment of despair. It was the moment right after, the one when he thought no one would show up. That's the true abyss, when hope grows silent, when waiting grows weary, when even faith begins to seem like a distant idea. And yet even in that state he stood there, perhaps waiting for nothing, or perhaps unknowingly waiting for exactly what would come next. Nathan's mind was a battlefield. His thoughts were like voices whispering that nothing would change, that he was alone, that it was already too late. But the curious thing is that, even at the height of his pain, something in him still wanted to be saved. A tiny part, perhaps, but present. It's this part that keeps us breathing when everything seems to have fallen apart. It's what keeps us going, even if it's just for one more day. And while he was lost in these thoughts, life outside went on. Children playing, cars passing by, random conversations. Everything around him seemed so distant from his pain. But it was there, in this brutal contrast between the world and his inner emptiness, that something unexpected approached. And maybe, just maybe, this moment wasn't a coincidence. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Sometimes, just by recognizing that we're walking through pain, something inside us begins to change. That's when she appeared. Nathan didn't even notice at first. His eyes were fixed on nothing, lost within himself, as if watching his own collapse in slow motion. But her footsteps, slow, short, steady, broke the muffled rhythm of the square. It was the subtle sound of someone walking unhurriedly, but with purpose, as if each step said, I know exactly where I'm going. She wasn't a noisy presence, quite the opposite, but there was something about her that drew attention, even inadvertently. Maybe it was her calm, or maybe it was the contrast with the chaos Nathan felt inside. She wore an antique beige coat with small embroidery near the collar. Nothing extravagant, but it carried the understated elegance of someone who has experienced many things. Her hair, tied in a loose bun, let out a few white strands that danced in the wind. Her face bore the marks of time, but none of them seemed to weigh heavily. They were the furrows of someone who has cried a lot, but also smiled genuinely. And the smile was gentle, almost maternal, but without being intrusive. It was the kind of smile that doesn't demand anything in return, that simply offers presence. Nathan only realized she was approaching when he first heard her voice, and it wasn't a question, it was a simple greeting. Good afternoon, son. No name asked, no intrusion, no explanation demanded. That was it. And for some inexplicable reason, it broke something inside him. not like someone breaking to destroy, but like someone breaking the ice on a lake to save someone trapped underneath. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it's curious how certain encounters escape logic. They simply happen, and when they do, it seems like time changes its texture. That woman wasn't part of Nathan's routine, wasn't a relative, hadn't been summoned, but she arrived exactly at the moment he was about to lose himself forever, as if there were a secret synchronicity between the desperation of one and the sensitivity of the other. There's something powerful about people who have traversed many stages of life. They carry a kind of wisdom that comes not from books or diplomas, but from real experiences, from pain, experienced and overcome, from cycles closed with dignity. And when this wisdom finds someone in a downturn, the impact is profound, because it doesn't come with judgment. It comes with understanding. It comes with presence. The mindset of someone who's been broken and rebuilt their own pieces is completely different. It's as if they know exactly when someone needs help, even if they don't even know it yet. And that's how it was with that lady. She sat next to Nathan as easily as someone sitting next to a grandchild, without needing to say, "I'm here for you." Her presence said it all. For a few minutes they said nothing, and that silence was more therapeutic than any advice. Nathan, accustomed to being interrupted, judged, or ignored, found in that pause a safe space, an emotional haven, as if, finally, someone saw beyond the surface. And that look alone was immensely valuable. Sometimes all we need is this: someone who looks at us without rushing, without trying to fix things, without rushing the pain, someone who just is. There's a hidden truth behind the scenes of human relationships. The simple act of staying, even without understanding everything, is a transformative act. That woman didn't ask questions, didn't try to extract confessions. She respected Nathan's time. She gave him space. And little by little, this began to open a small crack in the wall of pain he had built over the years. After a while, she looked at him and said, "You know, I've been there too, not on that bench, but in that place." And it was the first time in days he'd actually heard someone. Her tone wasn't one of someone speaking from above, but of someone who remembered, someone who brought back memories that hurt, but had healed with time. Those words, spoken unhurriedly, were like a lantern lit inside a cave. They didn't solve everything, but they showed there was a way out. And therein lies the power of unexpected encounters. They are seeds. They don't demand immediate fruit, but they plant something that over time can blossom. And that day, without realizing it, Nathan received the first seed of transformation. Comment: that really touched me. Because when we recognize this kind of encounter in our journey, or desire one, something inside us begins to reorganize. "You're not alone, dear." Those were the exact words she said, looking into his eyes with a gentle firmness, as if she knew the gravity of what she was saying, and even more the effect it could have. Nathan didn't respond immediately, but he felt something strange run through his body. It wasn't a shiver, nor a relief. It was something else. A forgotten sensation, perhaps. The feeling of being seen. Not just seen, but truly seen. From within. That sentence, spoken so simply, so directly, carried enormous weight. And at the same time, it was light. It was like a warm blanket on a cold day, like cool water after hours of walking in the heat. She didn't beat around the bush, didn't try to understand what was driving him to that state. She simply offered presence. And true presence is increasingly rare in this world, where everyone seems too busy to notice who's falling apart right next to them. Nathan felt a lump in his throat. He hadn't truly cried in days. The tears had dried up, or perhaps he'd locked them away. But in that moment, something gave way. The tears began to fall quietly, as if they were already waiting for permission. And the woman, who didn't even know his name, wasn't alarmed. She didn't try to stop him from crying. She simply placed her hand over his lightly, with an almost sacred care. It was in that gesture that the magic happened. Not movie magic, with music swells and applause at the end. It was a silent, internal, discreet magic, an emotional turning point, because there in that ordinary square, amidst the noise of the city and the chaos of his thoughts, a new space was born, a real space, without masks, without excuses, without defenses. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because we underestimate the power of simple words. They don't change reality itself, but they have the power to change the way we see it. And that, in itself, is transformation. There's a huge difference between listening to advice and being welcomed. When someone says you are not alone and means it, it breaks an internal narrative that's been feeding for ages. The narrative that whispers that no one cares, that no one will come, that there's no way out. The emotional impact of this kind of encounter is something that often goes unnoticed by those who have never been in a place of darkness. But anyone who has felt the ground disappear knows, hearing a phrase like this can be the fine line between continuing and giving up. And more than the words themselves, it's the look in the eyes of the person saying them that makes all the difference, because you can feel it when someone speaks from the heart. And she spoke from the heart. That woman didn't offer solutions nor promises. What she offered was something much more powerful, a mirror where Nathan could see himself again, not as a failure, but as someone who still deserved care. This is a kind of presence that heals, a presence that doesn't try to patch up the pain but walks with it, that says, yes, it hurts, but you're not alone in this. The hidden truth is that, at many points in our journey, what we need most is not someone to tell us what to do, but someone who will simply be there, whole, genuine, available. And that's exactly what he received on that park bench, a chance to breathe, a ray of light in the fog. And the curious thing is that she spoke little, but when she did, she seemed to choose each word with intention. She briefly recounted how she'd experienced dark days, how she'd also felt fear, shame, and loneliness. She didn't romanticize the pain, but she didn't run from it either. There was a naturalness in the way she spoke about her own ghosts, as if she'd embraced them rather than hidden them. Nathan listened in silence, but something inside him began to regroup. It was as if that conversation, which had no script, no clear objective, was clearing the dusty corners of his soul. Little by little, her words became a shelter. They didn't solve every dilemma, of course, but they showed that it was possible to weather the storm without losing oneself completely, and that at that moment was all he needed to know. Write it down. This gave me hope, because sometimes a single sentence, spoken at the right time, has the power to rewrite an entire story. The woman remained there, sitting next to Nathan as if that bench had been made for that meeting. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was something in her intonation that carried a quiet strength, one of those strengths that doesn't need shouting to be heard. She looked ahead, at the hustle and bustle of the square, as if watching an old movie that only she understood, and then began to tell about her youth. Not as someone trying to steal the spotlight, but as someone sharing something precious, almost like a secret whispered in the ear of time. She said she lost her father very young, in an unexpected accident that turned the routine of the house upside down. She said that for many years she carried the guilt of not having said goodbye, of having left that day without saying, "I love you," and that this absence shaped the way she came to see the world. With caution, yes, but also with a sweet urgency to say everything she feels while there is still time. Nathan listened in silence, absorbing every word. It was as if, for the first time, someone was translating aloud emotions he himself couldn't yet name. The woman spoke of failed loves, of moments when she felt lost, out of place, even invisible. And yet, between one memory and another, there was always a thread of hope running through the narrative, because even when faced with setbacks, she always chose to keep going. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there's something powerful in hearing real stories of overcoming hardships told by those who've walked difficult paths. These aren't sanitized, edited, or idealized stories. They're stories with cracks, with visible scars. And it's precisely these marks that reveal the beauty of transformation. The hidden truth is that no one gets through life unscathed. All of us at some point will feel like we've lost our way. But when someone older than us shares that they've been there too and managed to move forward, something inside us shifts our perspective. The impact of these revelations lies not only in the words, but in the mindset they inspire. Nathan began to realize that the suffering he felt didn't make him weak. It made him human. That failing in some chapters of life doesn't mean being a failure, but simply being in the process. A process that requires courage, resilience, and, above all, time. The woman said it so simply it felt like a prayer. Everything that takes time to blossom usually lasts longer. She spoke of the decisions she had to make when no one believed in her, of the times she had to start over from scratch with a broken heart and empty hands. But she also spoke of the friendships that arose in the most unlikely moments, the doors that opened when she least expected them, and the faith she slowly rebuilt. Not a religious faith, but a faith in her own journey, in her own worth. Nathan listened like someone drinking water after a long time in the desert, And it wasn't because she had magical answers. It was because, for the first time in a long time, he felt included in a narrative of humanity. The conversation showed that you don't need to have everything figured out to move forward. You just need to be willing to take one step at a time, even without seeing the whole path. She spoke with the lightness of someone who has learned to dance with loss, someone who understands that life, however hard, is also full of hidden possibilities. And that sometimes it's precisely when everything seems to be falling apart that something new is trying to be born. Her words weren't just comfort, they were a compass. She said she's grown accustomed to paying attention to those who are too quiet, because, according to her, the loudest screams are the ones no one hears, and perhaps her mission that day was simply to be there, beside someone who needed a reminder of their worth. The pains of youth are loud, she said, but they pass. What you do with them is what stays. Nathan didn't answer right away, but his eyes were different, still red, still heavy, but now there was a subtle gleam in them, a gleam of someone who had heard not just words, but a mirror, and for the first time in a long time, he saw himself reflected in someone who had won. Comment, there's still time to start over, because sometimes all we need is to hear, in the midst of chaos, that there's still a path where we only saw the end. He was silent for a few minutes. It was no longer the heavy silence of before, the one filled with pain and confusion. It was a different kind of silence now, a new, clean space, where something different was beginning to emerge. His eyes were still moist, but not for the same reason. Now there was something else there, a contained, timid glow, as if his soul was slowly testing the possibility of returning to the surface. Nathan took a deep breath, for the first real time that day, a breath that didn't come from his body but from within, from the part of him that had forgotten what it felt like to feel light. The lump in his throat was there, but he no longer clutched it angrily. It was almost as if the lump was part of the process, as if he were saying, it's okay to not be okay yet, but now you're not alone anymore. And then, in the midst of that meaningful silence, the corners of his mouth began to curve upward, slowly. It was a shy smile, almost imperceptible, but it was real. The first time in weeks, maybe in months. It wasn't the smile of someone who'd solved all their problems. It was the smile of someone who, for the first time, found a foothold to begin to rise. And that changes everything, because that's exactly where transformation begins, not when everything is resolved, but when hope breathes again. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because most people wait for the big turning point, as if it were a momentous event, a radical shift, an event that rewrites destiny in a split second. But the hidden truth is that transformation, more often than not, begins with small details, a look, a phrase, a touch, a shared silence that transforms into a genuine connection. It's these discrete, seemingly simple moments that have the greatest impact on someone's journey. Nathan didn't rush out of that square with a ready-made life plan. He didn't have an immediate revelation about what he would do from then on. But that smile, that intimate, spontaneous gesture, was a signal, an emotional milestone. As if by smiling, he was saying to himself, I'm still here. I still have something to feel. I can still go on. And that's what makes us human, the ability to find meaning even in the darkest days, even after so much pain. The woman noticed the smile but didn't comment. She didn't need to. She just smiled back, her eyes welling up too, because she knew exactly what that gesture meant. And that's the beauty of someone who's weathered storms. They understand signs others don't. She didn't force promises or expectations. She didn't ask what he would do the next day. She just stood there, with him, respecting the time, the intensity, and the rhythm of that moment. This attitude alone carries a rare wisdom, because the mindset of true support doesn't demand immediate responses. It embraces the process. And in that silent process, Nathan experienced a kind of gratitude that cannot be explained in words. It was gratitude for being seen, welcomed, respected, by someone who had no obligation to do so, but chose to do so anyway. And that's when we realize the real impact of small actions. It's not about solving someone's life. It's about being present at the exact moment someone is on the brink of collapse. It's about offering humanity in a world that's so busy. It's about giving someone back the permission to feel, to exist, to keep trying. The revelation that emerges from this kind of experience is profound. What saves is not a grand solution, but connection. The silent affection, the sincere touch, the non-judgmental listening. It is these behind-the-scenes moments of affection that create true turning points, because they activate within us the reminder that we still belong, that we still have value, that we are still part of something, even when everything seems to say otherwise. Nathan remained there for a while longer. He didn't want to leave, not because he was dependent on the woman, but because he knew that moment was unique. He knew it was marking his life in a way he would only fully understand later. But, in that very moment, he already felt it. Something had changed. And what changed wasn't the world around him. It was the way he began to see himself within himself. Write it down. I can still smile. Because sometimes, the first smile after the pain is the most powerful sign that we're coming back to life. From that day on, something silent stirred within Nathan. It wasn't like flipping a switch that changes everything overnight. It was more like an ember slowly rekindling, requiring care, time, and intention. What the woman did in that encounter wasn't save. It was remember. She reminded him with simple gestures and words full of truth that life could still have meaning, but the rest of the journey that he had to build on his own, step by step. The next day, Nathan woke up with the same emotional mess, the same problems, the same bills piled on the living room shelf. But there was something different there, a kind of inner presence, as if he had rediscovered a part of himself that had been lost. And with that feeling, he made a small but decisive decision. He sought out the neighborhood community center, the one he always passed by but never had the courage to enter. That morning, he went in. He was met by a social worker named Clara, who listened to his story attentively. She didn't promise miracles, but she did offer something concrete. A support program for unemployed youth with training workshops and emotional support. For the first time, Nathan signed up for something not out of obligation, but out of choice. It was the beginning of a new mindset, one of someone who doesn't wait for grand solutions, but begins to forge their own path with what they have. A few days later, he received a call about a temporary position at a local market. A few hours a week, a modest salary, but for Nathan it was no small feat. It was the first door that had opened since he'd shut himself off from the world. And by accepting, he felt like he was taking the wheel of his own life again, even without knowing exactly where it would lead. The important thing at that moment was to keep moving. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it's so common to romanticize new beginnings as if they were made only of great achievements and happy endings. But the hidden truth is that the beginning of a transformation is rarely glamorous. It's confusing, full of uncertainty, marked by falls and setbacks. What changes isn't the absence of difficulty, it's the presence of courage, the daily decision to keep going, even on days when everything seems stagnant. Nathan fell a few times. There were days when he thought about giving up again. There were moments when he wondered if it all made sense. But now there was a memory, the memory of that park bench, of the woman who sat beside him without asking for anything in return. And that memory served as an emotional anchor. Whenever darkness threatened to return, he remembered that moment of connection and reclaimed the strength he had discovered within himself. Little by little, he was rebuilding ties as well. He reconnected with his older sister, whom he hadn't spoken to in months. He called an old school friend and arranged to meet for coffee. He returned to drawing in his spare time, a passion he'd neglected since adolescence. Each of these actions was small on the outside, but gigantic on the inside, because they all required confrontation, not with the world, but with himself. They required a new approach, a new way of approaching one's own journey. And this is one of the greatest revelations this kind of story offers us. No one makes the path for you, but sometimes a single person shows you where to begin. The woman in the square didn't walk with him after that day. They never met again. But Nathan carried the impact of that gesture as a milestone. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what she awakened in him. Her gesture was the seed, but he was the one who decided to water it. This kind of attitude has a ripple effect. Nathan's change also affected those around him. His sister, seeing him more present, began to open up about her own feelings. Clara, the social worker, began using his story as inspiration for other services. And even the market owner, a serious and reserved man, commented one day that he hadn't seen such dedication in someone in years. All of this was born from a presence, a gesture, a look that said, "You matter." There's no way to predict what will emerge after a gesture like this, but it's true that it always leaves a mark. The difference lies in the decision to follow those marks with intention. And Nathan, despite all his pain and doubts, chose to keep going. He chose not to be defined by the moment of falling, but by the movement of getting up. Comment below, I'm building my path, because sometimes, just by saying it out loud or writing it down, we begin to transform the ground we tread. Years have passed since that day in the square. Much has changed in Nathan's life. He is no longer the lost young man in his 20s, sitting on a bench, suffocated by heavy thoughts. Today he works on social projects, helping vulnerable youth, and often says, with a discreet glint in his eye, that he knows well that place from which many think they will never leave. And it's true, he does. But he also knows the way out, and he never tires of remembering how it all began, with an elderly woman who appeared out of nowhere and told him, with tenderness and conviction, that he was not alone. The strangest thing is that Nathan never saw her again. For weeks he tried to retrace his steps, return to the same square, sit on the same bench at the same times. He even asked some people who lived nearby if they knew a woman with those features. No one knew. No clue, no indication. As if she had appeared only at that specific moment and then vanished into time, like a breeze that passes and leaves its scent in the air, but cannot be held. And perhaps that's precisely what touched him most. The fact that she had appeared for no apparent reason, stayed long enough to change everything, and then disappeared as if she had accomplished a mission. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something deeply symbolic about these encounters that seem to have been written in another dimension, beyond our rational control. There's a hidden truth behind the scenes of life. Many of the most important transformations don't come from great opportunities, but from unlikely moments with unexpected people. Sometimes, it's a stranger who says exactly what you need to hear. Other times, it's someone who shows up when everything's falling apart and offers silence, a listening ear, or a gesture that restores your humanity. These are the turning points that have no name, but have an impact. And if you look closely at your own journey, you might find traces of these encounters along your path too. The mystery behind that lady isn't who she was, but what she represented. She was the reminder, the sign, the necessary pause for Nathan to see possibilities, where before he only saw the end. And even though he never learned her name, he never referred to her as the lady in the square. He calls her the woman who saw me. Because deep down that's what we all need at some point. To be seen, truly, unhurriedly, without judgment. This experience shaped not only the way Nathan lived, but also the way he viewed others. He became attentive to details, to silence, to lowered eyes, to forced smiles. Because you know firsthand what it means to be on the brink and be rescued by a simple gesture. And that's why he insists on recalling this story whenever he gets the chance. Not to relive the pain, but to reinforce the value of presence, the impact of being, of perceiving. There's a misguided mindset, fueled by the world's rush, that makes us believe that only grand actions matter. But the reality is that small gestures, made at the right time with genuine intention, carry a transformative power that no formula can predict. A touch on the shoulder, a "how are you really?" eyes that don't look away. Or, as in Nathan's case, a phrase spoken with love by someone who wasn't even part of his life, but changed its course forever. And when you think about it, you begin to realize that perhaps these encounters are indeed part of something bigger. Perhaps there's no logical explanation, nor does there need to be. There are people who cross our path for seconds and leave marks that time cannot erase. The lady in the square was just that, a presence who arrived at the height of pain, unaware of what was going on behind the scenes, but knowing exactly how to act. And then she left, leaving in his heart the certainty that life, despite everything, could still be beautiful. Nathan says today, with a calmness that only those who have experienced something profound can achieve, that he has never felt that same kind of emptiness again. He's had other difficult moments, of course. Life doesn't change in a straight line, but since that encounter, he's come to carry something different, a kind of faith that isn't tied to religion or explanations, but to the memory that even in the darkest days, light can come from where you least expect it. Comment: I believe in these encounters, because sometimes just believing that this is possible completely changes the way we walk through life. How many lives have been saved by a kind word? We never know for sure. There's no way to measure the impact of a gesture, a presence, a look that chooses to stay when everything seems to be falling apart. But the truth is that behind many stories of recovery, there's someone who, at a crucial moment, decided to be a shelter. And that's what that lady was for Nathan, an unexpected, silent, transformative shelter. She took nothing from him, expected nothing in return, left no address, no questions. She simply gave what many people have but rarely offer: time, listening, and compassion. And that was enough to reignite the spark he'd already considered extinguished. A spark that multiplied, became courage, then purpose, and today, inspiration. Because yes, this story was told by him himself years later, in a letter that reached a group of volunteers, along with an anonymous donation. On the envelope, he wrote just one sentence: "Sometimes a stranger changes everything." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the reflection this story brings isn't just about who was saved, it's also about who saves, about the possibility that, at any moment, we can be that presence in someone's life. It doesn't matter if you don't have all the answers, if you're going through your own dilemmas, or if you feel like you have nothing special to offer. Sometimes all someone needs is exactly what you have: your listening ear, your welcoming silence, your willingness to see the other person beyond appearances. There's a hidden truth in the way society works today. We're all connected, yet at the same time deeply isolated. Social media showcases smiles, achievements, and performances. But what about behind the scenes? Who's there on the days when the ground disappears? Who notices the lost look of that friend who's disappeared, that co-worker who's been too quiet, that neighbor who's stopped opening the window? It's in these moments that the opportunity arises to act with presence, to be the unlikely gesture that breaks the spiral of pain. Being like that lady doesn't require age, experience, or education. It just requires sensitivity. And this sensitivity begins when we decide to truly look, when we commit to being more attentive, less rushed, more willing to listen to what isn't being said. It's this kind of decision that makes an impact, not only on the lives of others, but on our own as well. Because when we care, we heal too. When we welcome, we also feel a sense of belonging. This is a journey made of subtle choices, choices that make no noise but leave their mark. And the question that remains, perhaps the most important of all, is, what if today you're the one who has the chance to be that lady for someone? Maybe someone around you is exactly like Nathan was that day, waiting for a sign, a pause, a hand, and maybe this gesture that seems small now is actually the turning point in a story yet to be told. Comment there: I choose to be present. Because this choice, even silent, can be the difference between someone sinking into silence or finding their way again. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. And that's precisely why this space exists, to tell stories that remind us of what truly matters: connection, presence, empathy. If this content brought you clarity, comfort, or just that good feeling of someone putting into words something you felt, then it makes sense to continue this exchange. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Here, each video is carefully crafted to touch those who need it, perhaps as it has for you. And if you can, leave a like. This shows that this connection resonated with you and helps this type of content reach more people who are looking for something similar. Oh, and tell me in the comments, right, this message was for me, just so I know you stayed until the end. Because there's something special about someone who stays until the last word. And if you want to continue this conversation, there's a video right here that complements everything we talked about. Click and stay with me there. The next story is already waiting for you.